made a calendar.
Right, you're talking about the Anatoly Fomenko stuff primarily.
Yeah, and there's another guy that has a few other websites.
Yeah, it is interesting, like some of the people who are into that thing, they make the case that a lot of old buildings will have the date they were built chiseled right in them, and then it'll be like an I or a J. And, you know, there's an official answer for what that means, but then the alternative answer to some people is like, well, the I was turned into a 1, and then it was just made to be 1,000 years later, and they changed the timeline, and then you reverse engineer, well, what purpose would that serve? Why would they do that? If we do live in a system of cyclical cataclysm, and the current elite survived the last one because they had prior knowledge and then emerged and then kind of just took over Europe, because it is odd that the European royal families are all connected and cousins and brothers. Shouldn't the Spanish people just be Spanish and the French people, French king and queen, just be French? And like, why are they all cousins? So they all come from the same bunker in some weird Fallout reality. There is, I kind of am, as a thought exercise at least, interested in all that kind of material because of the cyclical cataclysm thing and the idea that they would manipulate it. But I do think one of the things that is kind of fun to learn going down that rabbit hole is how shockingly few people really, where we get our history from, our official history. Like, you go to Herodotus and it's like a couple of people, and then you go to like the Vatican chroniclers and it's like they're really Scaliger, you know, it's really like 5 to 10 people have written down all of our history, and we kind of have accepted that that's the history. And who's to say these people could be trusted, or were motivated by other things, or compelled to lie, or working for a system like the Vatican to steer a certain narrative? I mean, narratives are steered today. Why wouldn't they be steered in the earliest writings of the people who are propped up as official historian? You know, anyone who gets that official status, exalted status, you know, you got to be kind of skeptical in the world we live in. And it is interesting to go down that rabbit hole just to find out that so much of our history is based on the writings of like 5 guys when you get back to a certain level. But then how could it be any other way, really? So it's like, I don't know what to think about it, but it can be fun as a thought exercise to think about the whole timeline being different. But really it's just numbers. Like, the calendar is just numbers, so it's kind of like a man-made arbitrary thing anyway, but I do think it's fun. And then thinking about the shifting of the calendar and the changing of the calendar to get us out of sync with natural time so that none of our magic works because we don't know when the right magical times are. That's the angle that I kind of like.
So, speaking of magic, I'm going to do this from like a time magic perspective, which is, so Edward Gibbon, who wrote Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he wrote this on, the inspiration to write this was when he was on the Grand Tour and he was in Rome, and he saw some monks singing Vespers in the Temple of Jupiter in Rome. And he had a kind of spirit moment about this, of like, fuck, this is weird, like, this is a temple to this one sky god, and now we got these bros in there with hoods doing a different sky god, but like, am it really a different sky god? And then he goes to Switzerland and writes this book. And one of the things that happened, which by the way took him like 15 years, and there was a moment where he was walking down the hill in Switzerland, it's very hilly, obviously, and this fog, and he was thinking about a Roman military battle that happened on those hills this morning. And all around him, he's hearing the sound, like he basically time traveled. Because he's like, I'm having a moment of hearing, I've walked into time, I've walked into a moment in the past that I'm writing about that happened here. Time and how we understand it is contained within our worldview. So from a shamanic perspective, you basically have this moment, and let's call it the upper world and the future, and the past, which is also the realm of the ancestors. And this is not a linear understanding, but the idea of linear time is contained within a specific worldview that we operate with it. So when you find anomalies in history, and you do, it's like, okay, what's going on here? Is it that we actually have the correct view of history, which is that it's linear, and that we have these bubbles of anomalies, like, oh, I don't know, like, did someone add 1,000 years? It's like, well, probably, but it could it seems more likely to me that the shamanic understanding of time is more correct, which is that we are in this present moment, and you have this thing called the past, which is also the realm of the ancestors, which is nevertheless alive and contactable and something that you can engage with. And that is an overstory or container story that can literally hold every single temporal anomaly in a way that doesn't appear anomalous in Aboriginal Australia or in the Amazon or anywhere else that hasn't made the kind of guess that maybe time works like a fucking line for some reason. Like, that's really interesting to me. Like, I love temporal anomalies because I was a 90s like Star Trek Next Gen kid, but also because when I hear these things, I hear something different. I hear like, oh, that's the realm of the ancestors. That's something that is alive and contactable and still has medicine and stories for it. So I love all the past stuff, but the trouble is a lot of the, dare we say, conspiracizing around it begins with the assumption that linear time is somehow some kind of correct thing. And that's just not what we find when we experience, dare we say, what Martin Prechter would call more intact cultures around the world, where like the past, like, and I can tell you this from an ayahuasca perspective, like when you're doing that work of releasing trauma from the past, you're like, it's some kind of alive. When you're back there with those moments, it's some kind of alive, transformative thing. I don't have a good way of describing it, but then the overstory is enough. So for me, when I think about the temporal anomaly shows, I have a different overstory for it that contains the very compelling evidence that is nevertheless in there.
I like that. Much more intellectual answer. My man.